Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome to our Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall, and to our guest, the former Director of Corporate Communication at Midwest Energy, Bob Helm. That's hard to say, former director now, officially retiring as of August 3rd.
Yep.
And the question becomes, now what?
Oh wow! Well, there are a lot of things that we can do. Of course, just got back from Florida not too long ago. Had a little vacation, and of course we have children in Olathe and grandchildren and children in Denver, and so we'll be going back and forth watching ball games for the kids and that kind of stuff. But we have some plans, things to do around the house, things to do around the yard, things you don't ever get to when you're working. So I don't think I'll have any trouble staying busy at all.
Now, your wife, Marilyn, retired, about a year ahead of you?
January 3rd this year,
Okay.
She retired, yeah. So about 7 months, 8 months.
And so the transition is going to be kind of a smoother transition than maybe everybody leaves at the same time.
I don't know. She's explained to me already. I'm going to have to find something to do and stay out of her way and around the house. But no, I think everything will work out just fine.
Well, you're not going to walk away from community events and activities and
Actually,
Optimus
no, not at all. I'm still going to be an Optimus member. I'm still going to be a chamber member and an ambassador, although I'll have to buy my own membership now, as an individual. I'll still remain in Tiger Club, so there are a lot of things that I can still do around town, and some other volunteer things that will be going on.
As a matter of fact, if you have an opening, go ahead and call Bob now, because he's plenty of time on
I can't tell you how many calls I've already turned down.
I would imagine.
So let me just get into this mode and see what I need to do next.
Take a little time first and kind of work into it, and then work back into it again.
Exactly.
As we have done here at Eagle Television. Going back, and of course, we've got a long history to cover here today with Bob Helm, starting with the early days of KAYS, back when it was the Bob Schmidt radio station, and was the only game in town.
Yeah, exactly, the only one. Yeah, I started back in, I think it was 1969, if I remember right, because I had just gotten married, and I was working two jobs. I was working at the 4 Days Experiment Station, if you can imagine, during the summertime, and we were putting up hay and throwing it in those big barns out there, about 150-degree heat, and I'd get off work there at 4:30, had a half hour for lunch, and then run home, change, and have to be at the radio station by 5:30. We did news headlines or whatever it was, and then I worked till midnight that night. Mainly listening to Royals games and listening to remember the old Muzak big reel tapes that we had that ran all night long. And I did that for about the first year there. And then moved into an afternoon shift, started writing copy, did the continuity, and then logging the commercials. And then finally, I don't know, 4 or 5 years into it, I decided that the only way I was going to be able to afford to feed myself and my family was to get into sales. And so I got into sales, and the last couple of years I was a sales manager. I was out there for 10 years.
And made a lot of contacts at the time, which was a nice transition then into helping Raleigh at the advertising agency, right?
Yeah. Then we started, Raleigh Fisher came in with RDF and Associates, and I had called on him for about a year. And we talked and visited and decided that he was very strong in the journalism portion of all of that, the brochures and design work and that kind of thing, and I had the broadcast experience, and so we decided to become partners, and we had that for, I think maybe 5 years, 6 years, somewhere in there, and had quite a few clients all over Western Kansas.
Really successful.
Seemed to be very successful, but then mid-'80s the economy started to tank, and I was the minority owner in the ad agency, and so it was my turn to go find a job. And so I guess it would have been about middle of December of 1985. I luckily was hired on by Midwest Energy to be their communications specialist at the time. And that was almost 27 years ago.
About 27 years at Midwest Energy.
Yeah.
And when you began, I think fair to say that it was a one-man show.
At Midwest, it actually still is.
You're not going to give credit to anybody that doesn't deserve it.
I had a lot of help from a few people. Brenda Hutchison helped me a lot, but she actually is the CEO's executive assistant. But I was in that department, and so Brenda did help a lot, especially with proofreading and things like that needed to be done.
Well, she at least screens your calls, as I...
She did some of that, thankfully. But actually the communications department still today is filled by one person, and then we have some assistants that will do some help.
We recognize the voice obviously immediately with the Midwest Energy commercials that run, and the background information whenever there's a power outage or a severe weather or something that causes some outages. We certainly recognize Bob's voice, but there was more to it than just the audio portion, because there was a lot of print material that had to get out too, right?
Oh yeah, every month we had to put out a newsletter for all the customers, which was about 60,000 print job. Every week I did an employee newsletter that was 11 by 17, folded in half. So there was basically two 8.5 by 11 pages. Of course, photography was involved with that, all the writing, just knowledge of knowing what the guys out in the field were doing. So that you could write something that was kind of coherent to most of the employees when you put out that employee newsletter. But then we had, the brochures, and I wrote speeches for the annual meeting and put together the PowerPoint presentation later on. Previously, it was slideshows that we did, and of course that. From the ad agency standpoint with RDF, I had experience of putting together slideshows with 1, 2, or 3 projector screens. If you remember how long ago that was, where you could actually get things to move on the screen. Don't have that much problem anymore with computers. But then the newspaper ads that we used to have to take down to the print shop and have them actually lay them out, and then wax, paste, cut, and then shoot what we used to call photometallurgic plates, PMTs, a transfer they called it, and then mail those off to the newspapers. So times have changed. Well, a perfect example is radio. My radio studio, years and years and years, was I would go out to KAYS and try and figure out when I could get in when nobody else was to record commercials on a reel-to-reel tape, and then mail those tapes to the radio stations. The last several years, my radio studio was a little box about that big with a microphone and a computer and editing software, and all of a sudden you save MP3s, email them, and you're done. Same thing with newspaper ads, put together something in PageMaker or InDesign, and all of a sudden within 30 minutes you've sent out a newspaper ad to every newspaper in Northwest Kansas. So things became easier in the computer generation than when I first started, but I tell you what, I wouldn't want to go back to what we were doing previously, I can tell you that. It was a lot easier just because you can sit at your desk rather than run all over town doing those things.
Pretty high learning curve for all this new technology.
Yeah, it was really kind of funny because I did not have a computer on my desk when I started, and back in those days at Midwest Energy, actually we were kind of ahead of the curve in that I think we had one Apple in the building that actually Brenda Hutchison had, and then we had CRTs, they called them, which were actually connected via telephone line and running some digital information down the telephone line to all of the offices. So the customer service ladies had contact with offices, but there was really nothing else there. And then computers started to come in, and I inherited Brenda's old Apple computer and got to try and learn on that. And of course, she did have the software, the Photoshop and the PageMaker, and the Word and that kind of stuff. And my first computer then was actually a PC. All of a sudden, everything I learned on the Apple, which wasn't that much different, of course, had to be transferred then over to the PC. But there weren't any classes back then either, so it was kind of a trial
young
and
people
error.
running around who knew how to put it together.
No. My kids were gone by that time. I couldn't get them to help, but no, it was all trial and error, and it was a pretty good learning curve at the time. But it was a lot of fun because it was something new, and that new technology is always a lot of fun to mess with.
Bob, Midwest Energy's been a good mix, not only for you, obviously, but certainly for the area, because of the type of company it is, the kind of people who work there, the dedication that they have. I mean, I'm sounding like a Midwest Energy commercial, but it's true, I mean, it really is.
One of the things that I'm most proud of is that we never had, and I can't see that we probably ever will, as a company, as Midwest Energy, ever have a public relations debacle of any kind. We have people who have grown up in the area, who have relation in the area, and I'll guarantee you, when we have an outage somewhere, Mom and Dad, aunts and uncles, hey, they're calling on the phone, how come you're not out there fixing this yet? Those deals. Our guys are really, really dedicated. It's really kind of interesting because when they went to work on the Katrina problems down in I think our guys went to Louisiana maybe, or Mississippi, and then again we went to help with a tornado in Chicago one time. And these were, very large companies that we were working for. And they had guys that, they'd be there at 8 and they'd leave at 5. And it didn't matter whether things were fixed or not. And there's a totally different work ethic out here in western Kansas. One, we're a cooperative. So Midwest Energy is owned by its customers. Don't have to answer to faraway investors. And make sure that we make enough money so that their dividends are big enough. Now all we have to do is make sure that the lines stay up and people have service, and we can cover our debt service, and so we don't have to have outrageous rates for one thing. We don't have to have people who really don't care whether they get the job done or not. We have people who care that the job is done. And that made a really big difference, and that's what I really enjoyed about working there was, and I took a lot of phone calls from a lot of unhappy folks, especially when we had the big ice storms a few years ago. And once they understood that, hey, we had 15 miles of line down, both directions coming in to serve them, and they knew that we were going to get it back up. It was just going to take some time, and that made a real difference, I think. And that's what makes a real difference with Midwest Energy out in Northwest Kansas, is that is a philosophy of the company that we are here to serve the customer, and that's the way it'll always stay. So,
well, and you go down the list, Bob, of things, not to put too fine a point on the Midwest Energy service, but things like helping out those families who might need some assistance in paying bills. The averaging out of bills over a year's period from month to month. The work on reducing the amount of energy used. This is kind of contrary to what you would think about an energy company, but Midwest Energy's always been interested in the latest technology, whether it's the new service center or putting in low energy bulbs and air conditioners and things like that.
Well, and again, I think that stems back to the fact that Midwest Energy is a cooperative, and Midwest Energy again is owned by its customers. So we were one of the first in the entire area to use earth-coupled heat pumps to heat and cool our new corporate office building 25 years ago. Now earth-coupled heat pumps are kind of the thing to do now. So we were always kind of ahead of the curve on that. This latest program that we have called House Smart, where folks are able to pay for energy efficiency stuff through their bills. Is a totally new thing that we actually picked up in New Hampshire or Vermont or somewhere. A little co-op there was doing it. But again, it came from the cooperative side of the electric and natural gas industry. And so, Midwest Energy has always tried to look out as far ahead in the future as we can. And, it's not all rosy, not all good news, because the future does not look good for a lot of the new things that are coming down the pipe, especially from the EPA and some of that. With some of the old power plants, and there's no doubt costs are going to be going up in not very near future.
You mentioned earlier, where are the boys now?
Actually, my son Eric and grandson Will are in Olathe, and my daughter, her husband, and Kelly and Brett, and then Caden are 11-and-a-half-year-old, soon to be sixth grader grandson.
Oh, wow.
Are in Olathe also. They live within about 10 blocks of each other, actually, so it's real easy to go visit them. And then Chris and Michelle and our two smaller, younger grandchildren, Kenan and Kendall, the only granddaughter, are in Denver, actually in Centennial, which is a suburb.
Certainly within traveling distance, for sure.
4.5 hours either direction, so we're sitting right here in the middle and have no plans to go anywhere else as long as all the grandkids and kids are where they are. It's easy for us to either go east or west. It's just a matter of when Marilyn flips the coin where we're going to go next.
That part about staying involved in the community, I think, is important, as you certainly well know through your involvement in the community with ambassadors and optimists, etc. A great place to really raise a family and to put down roots, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely is. But probably wouldn't have gone anywhere else. Had I known what I know now, I'd have stayed in Hays. Absolutely. I came out here from Junction City. I grew up in Junction City, and came out here to college at Fort Hays. I was on the 30-year plan. I managed to get a degree in 1996. I started
Much to the surprise of several people.
Yeah, exactly. Started in '66. I ended up with a family. I ended up with going in the National Guard. The Vietnam War was going on back in those late '60s, early '70s, and so it was a matter of there were other things going on, and I needed to do those things rather than to complete school. And luckily, again, Midwest Energy gave me the opportunity, and we had a program that paid for college education, and I was able to go back and take some classes and complete school. But yeah, I had to hurry to beat my children to graduate from college. But all three of our kids graduated from Fort Hays. All three of our kids are doing very well. And so things worked out very well in the long run.
What about your successor? Is he ready to go?
Yeah. Mike Morley is the guy that we ended up hiring. Of course, I wasn't involved in the process and really didn't want to be, because I didn't want to taint anything that we were looking at. But Mike is a Navy vet of, I think, like 23 years. He actually grew up in Topeka. He seriously, surprisingly enough, got a degree, I should say surprisingly, but as a part of the Fort Hays Navy virtual college thing. Mike actually ended up getting his master's from Fort Hays State University. His last 4 years he was in Singapore. And he just happened he was getting ready to retire from the Navy. He wanted to move back to Kansas to get somewhere close to his family, and happened to see this job opening and applied. Well, he had every bit of the necessary experience that would have been needed to come in here and do the job. Even though it's still a one-man shop, a single-person deal, Mike had done it all. He had he was one of, I think, 214, 216 public relations guys in the Navy. He was involved with like 12 countries out of Singapore doing public relations work for the Navy, and I believe the 7th Fleet. So, if we do have another ice storm at some point in time, I don't think it'll be probably nearly as much of a crisis for him as the tsunami was when they had the nuclear meltdown in Japan, and he had to explain why the 7th Fleet was leaving. You know what I'm saying? So I think Mike will be fine, and I understand you might want to visit with him at some point in time, but I believe he has 3 kids, high school and middle school, and then his wife, and they're all moved in, I think, and settled in Hays, and he's been working now for about a month, maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere in there.
We're not going to get completely away from hearing that voice on Midwest Energy, or maybe in some of the other voiceovers you're doing, are we?
There could be some other voiceovers. I don't know about, nobody's made an offer for Midwest Energy.
All right, that's on the table right now. Ernie Lehman, the CEO.
Actually, and again, Mike had done television and radio in the Navy with Armed Forces Radio and TV. And so he very well may be doing some of that.
I was going to say, you might be replaceable after all.
They had to go all the way to Singapore to find somebody, but very possibly.
Got it done. Bob Helm, former Director of Corporate Communications at Midwest Energy. Our thanks again to producer Jeff Durall, and thanks to you for watching Community Connection from Eagle Community Television.